that they have done so much to create. So you're getting the worst of both worlds here. And the Europeans seem incapable of recognizing this and doing anything to fix the situation. They're just so deeply committed to this hostile relationship with Russia, and they're having so much trouble dealing with President Trump that it appears that there's no way out for them, and the future therefore looks bleak for Europe. I have zero optimism. I think there is no reason at all to think that these negotiations are going to produce a real peace. If you look at Russia's demands, which have been clearly laid out many, many times, and you recognize that these are basically non-negotiable demands, at least a handful of them are, and we know them well. They're non-negotiable. And then you look at what the European/Ukrainian position is on these demands. They are polar opposites. There's no overlap. The Europeans and the Ukrainians are completely at odds in terms of their demands with Russia's demands. So I don't see how you can even come close to having some sort of agreement. I don't think maybe you can point to any of Russia's major demands where the Europeans have caved in. The Europeans and the Ukrainians both still want Ukraine to have a security guarantee. And from a Russian point of view, this is unacceptable because it is just another way of putting Ukraine inside of NATO. It's de facto NATO membership. The Russians do not want the United States giving Ukraine an Article 5 security guarantee. But that's what the Ukrainians want, and that's what the Europeans want. With regard to territory, the Russians have made it manifestly clear, again on countless occasions, that they want all of the territory in those 4 oblasts that they have annexed. As best I can tell, the Ukrainians and the Europeans won't even agree to give the Russians full control over those 2 oblasts in the Donbass, much less all 4 oblasts on territory. There's just no sign of meaningful agreement. And with regard to the size of the Ukrainian army that would exist in any peace agreement, the 2 sides are light years apart. The Europeans and the Ukrainians are talking about a Ukrainian military that has somewhere between 600,000 and 800,000 men in it. At the Istanbul negotiations back in 2022, the Russians were insisting on a Ukrainian army that had about 85,000 soldiers. So when you contrast 85,000 with 600,000 to 800,000 soldiers, you see the 2 sides are light years apart. Has there been any movement, any sign of a compromise on this issue? No. Has there been any sign of a compromise on the territorial issue? No. Has there been any sign of a compromise on the issue of a security guarantee? No. So what is all this talk about getting some sort of meaningful agreement? This is all, as I like to say, a giant kabuki dance. There's just no there. And nevertheless, just to take this a step further, the Ukrainians and the Europeans continue to talk about a ceasefire. And even occasionally the Americans talk about a ceasefire. The Russians have again made it unequivocally clear there will be no ceasefire. And in fact, when Trump met with Putin in Anchorage last summer, Trump came out of the meeting saying the whole subject of a ceasefire was off the table because Putin had made it clear to him there was going to be no ceasefire. that this war was going to be settled one way or another on the battlefield. And Trump said that. He recognized it at the time. But with the passage of time, he's back to occasionally talking about ceasefires. And the Europeans and the Ukrainians much more frequently talk about ceasefire. But it's not going to happen. This one's going to be settled on the battlefield. There's eventually going to be, I think, an armistice because one side or the other will prevail. And that's just another way of saying it'll be settled on the battlefield. But it's not going to be settled in diplomatic negotiations in Abu Dhabi or in Istanbul or in Moscow. This is not going to happen, at least based on everything we've seen up to now.